Hi, this is Mark, and welcome to Part 1, which I call A for Accept. Part 1 of our 5-part Bitcurrency free course to get you started using and to help you become an early adopter of Bitcurrency and to take advantage of your incredible timing in this marketplace. This first session sets the stage for accepting and understanding the state of our current money system before digital currency and understanding some of the money concepts that you probably were never taught in school. I know I wasn't. So let's get started. The first step in adopting something new is to get clear on where we are, accept where we're starting. Unfortunately, although we all use money, few of us have taken the time to learn how our monetary system works. It's not taught in schools, and it's never explained well on TV or in the news. We're just pointed at a few meaningless, out-of-context markers like CPI or GDP or jobs, markers that are often intentionally sweetened up to make whomever is in power look prosperous or generous or benevolent. So here's a disclaimer. Giving a history of important monetary ideas in about 20 minutes is like telling someone the history of the world while they balance on one foot. By definition, it's superficial and incomplete, but I'm going to try and beat the odds and give you a few important concepts in this lesson. Without a cursory understanding of how money and the world of money works and how it might be improved to serve us better, you can't really understand or appreciate how Bitcurrency works, or why it makes so much sense. It's hard to appreciate the solution to problems that you don't even know exist. Here's a warning, though. If you've never looked into these issues and you've only received your economic news from the media sprint or from your parents, you're in for an eye-opening ride. These ideas may seem stunning. I can assure you that everything here is verifiable, 100% truth and fact. So, buckle up. Let's go. Point 1. What money is. It's a container for holding our work. Money began when the exchange of one item for another, which is called barter, got clumsy. One goat traded for 12 chickens works if you have and want these items. But things get complicated finding just the right barter partner if someone wants to trade eggs, coal, beef, diamonds, or shoes. It became advantageous to place a value on each of these things based on supply and demand, and to use markers of value to sell and exchange goods. It started probably with seashells and precious stones, but gold and silver since biblical times have been used as money because they're portable, divisible, durable, and a store of value. If you think about it, the thing that creates wealth, the origin of actual value, is our work, or in other words, our production. I'm going to have you stop there, and I'm going to repeat that. The thing that creates wealth, the origin of actual value, is our work, our production. In this way, money, especially sound money, can capture the value of our labor, the amount of value that the marketplace values what we do in, say, an hour. And we can, in essence, lock up an hour's work in a bottle and save it for a later time. At a minimum wage, a $10 bill might represent an hour of our work. So the first concept, point 1, is that money is a token or marker for capturing, holding, and storing our labor, our work. Point 2, gold and silver, vaults and receipts, and the temptation. Many thousands of years ago, people used gold and silver as money. As we said earlier, it's divisible, it's portable, it's durable, and it's a great store of value. But as wealth savings increased, and those savings started to make us targets for theft, people stored precious metals in vaults, often with jewelers, who already had vaults in place for their own business. And they gave us paper receipts for our metal. Over time, it became easier to trade the silver or gold receipts to buy stuff rather than hauling out the actual metal, and thus gold-backed paper money was born. It was a receipt for the actual metal, but it was easier to transport and trade with. Bankers and jewelers, though, discovered a way to exploit this system. Since most people left their gold and silver in the vault and used the paper receipts instead, the vault owners realized that they could cheat the system by issuing more receipts than there was metal in the vault. And no one would know because everyone trusted them and the system, and it was unlikely that everyone would come at once to withdraw their metal, revealing the dishonest accounting. So this was the origins of an untrusting relationship between bankers and depositors. Unfortunately, repeated through history, people caught on, often because the receipt-printing bankers were visibly living far, far beyond their means. As humans, we want to trust people, but over millennium it seemed that holding all that wealth was a little too tempting to resist dipping in and printing extra receipts. As banks and governments got intertwined, the temptation transferred to also include politicians. There are hundreds of stories of governments also debasing coins by minting them a little short of the proper amount of gold and silver, or of overprinting too many receipts, both which dilute the currency. The theme here is that trusting people or citizens are always the losers to the people who control the money, be they bankers and or politicians. Mayor Amschel Rothschild in 1790 from the famous European banking family was quoted as saying, "Let us control the money of a country, and we care not who makes its laws." The U.S. Constitution stipulates that only gold and silver were legal tender in the U.S., specifically to insulate we the people from the known trickery of international bankers and corrupt politicians who might manipulate paper currency through money printing. So point 2 is that people who have control of a nation's money, be they bankers, governments, or a combination, historically have always been untrustworthy and unreliable stewards of this task. It seems that it's just too tempting. Point 3, central banks delegating money printing to outsiders. In the United States and many other Western countries, the government can legally print currency backed by gold and silver as deemed necessary by Congress. There are these outside institutions, known as central banks, owned by private international bankers, that try to entice governments, though, to delegate and subcontract this important function to them. And they, the central banks, loan money to the government at interest, rather than having the government issue its own currency without interest. You might ask, as I did, who in their right mind would borrow money at a cost, paying double the amount with interest over 30 years, when they could legally print it without any interest cost? What could be the possible benefit? Well, there is no benefit to us, to the people, except that borrowing money does not subject the government to the same restrictions as issuing it. In a way, it provides an end run, a loophole around sound accounting and restrained spending for the government. It is costly to we the people, since it creates a burden of interest to be paid by future generations. But from a politician's standpoint, looking only at today, it creates an unintended function of government, letting politicians spend money and promise stuff that they couldn't otherwise afford. In our modern world of no term limits and favoring lobbyists and a focus on re-election that seems greater than always representing the interests of the citizens, having a little extra spare change, some free money, a credit line, can make all the difference. Suddenly, there's money to help special interest groups, to give constituents entitlements, and generally keep everyone happy, keep the system lubricated. It keeps people happy, but at a great cost. And the cost is paying for the borrowed money twice every 30 years, once for the principal and a second time for interest. This system has been around since 1913, and as of 2018, our government has borrowed over 20 trillion extra dollars over budget, which is greater than the GDP, the total production, of the nation. As you may know from credit card bills that might have gone unattended, interest can eat you up. Our central bank in the United States is deceptively called the Federal Reserve Bank, which is somewhat ironic because it is not federal. It has no reserves. It actually prints money from thin air and loans it to the government. And it's technically not a bank, although it does act as a cartel, an association, or trade union to represent the interests of its member banks, which are, again, private companies. From the banking temptation that we already discussed, you can guess that the interests of the bank are usually at odds with the interests of ordinary Main Street citizens. Since the Fed has been authorized to print money, they've been quite generous with it, recalling that every dollar they print comes back to them with interest. Since 1913, they've turned a dollar, which we call a Federal Reserve note, worth 100 cents in 1913, into a note which is currently worth about 3 cents. So we ask, where did the 97 cents go? It vanished from the buying power of the money that we citizens used and saved, and that was a token or marker for our labor. The money printing over a century was a slow, hidden tax on the purchasing power of our money, nibbling and decaying at it as a store of value. That money was siphoned intentionally out of our pockets and bank accounts subtly, and it was transferred to the banking system. They gave it a name, a big name, called inflation. But a better name is probably really theft of value. A currency that's tied to gold or silver never experiences inflation, as we saw from 1780 to 1913. An ounce of gold or silver or a dollar bought about the same thing during well over a century, until the banks started nibbling away at our purchasing power. So the third point is that inflation is not normal or necessary or usual. It's the result of governments or politicians or banks or all of the above colluding to steal and printing excess money. If we were to do it, they would send us to jail. It would be called counterfeiting. But if banks and governments do it, it is legal, and it is called inflation. The irony is that we hear openly about inflation as though it was a good thing, as though it were natural and expected. And the real humor is that it's expressed as rising prices. The price of coffee or tea or beef or olive oil is rising, the news says. But put more bluntly, it's really the buying power of the dollar that's further eroding and buying less coffee or tea or beef or oil than last week. Money printing is diluting. It's like adding water to keep filling a bottle of whiskey. After a while, it no longer performs its intended full-strength purpose. Inflation means watered-down money. Point 4, notes are debts, they're not receipts, and fiat is a decree. To further open a healing wound, in 1971, the U.S. actually detached the dollar, the Federal Reserve note, from gold, so that it is now backed by nothing. Until that time, there was a ratio of gold that we kept and dollars that were created, although the bankers' temptation caught up with them and we unhitched from gold before they got caught with more dollars and an emptying gold vault. The take-home message is that linking paper currency to a fixed amount of precious metal goes a long way towards keeping people in the system honest. An unbacked currency, however, such as we've had for the past 45 years, is known as a fiat currency. It has no inherent value, and it is given value by fiat, which is the Latin word for decree, by the issuing government. Governments actually decree and demand that people use their money. Fiat currencies have a long history over hundreds of years. It's a tirelessly bad idea, and it's been repeated over and over. All works well as long as the general public is obedient and trusts in the system, and it ends poorly when the trust and faith in the government, in the fiat currency, collapses. Interestingly, fiat currency has been around almost 3,000 years, since around 740 BC, when the Chinese Tang dynasty introduced paper money. It was a winning idea for governments and emperors who have the itch to print their pictures on slips of paper. There have been hundreds of fiat currencies over history. Today, the currency of most nations, euros, pounds, dollars, pesos, yen, etc., are all unbacked fiat currencies. Oh, and there's another fact that history will whisper to us if we listen closely. All fiat currencies last an average of 40 years, and then they ultimately collapse and return to their inherent value of zero, which is the cost of the paper they're printed on. To repeat that would be all, which means 100% of all fiat currencies throughout history collapse. Just saying. So point 4 is that fiat currencies historically live on a knife edge of trust. They are not money as in receipts, but they are pure debt as in loans and borrowing. Fiat money is empty of value. Point 5, and the last point, is centralized trust authority. I call it trust in a box. By now you can probably tell that I love banks and bankers. But there's one other point that really puts me over the edge. If the average person had even an inkling about how greedy and self-serving banks have been historically, they would run away. But banks, totally ironically, have been able to market and image themselves as icons of trustworthiness. We in society happen to have a need for a solid, trustworthy intermediary to help us conduct transactions between two parties. When two strangers want to do business together, we are reassured if there is a third trusted party in the middle of our transaction that knows both parties. It is like A blind date maybe has a better than zero chance of success if some third party that knows both of you fixes you up. Maybe. In commerce, business, financial transactions, we've always needed some person or company or institution to mediate and moderate and be a middleman in the transaction to provide trust to both buyer and seller. Despite all the abusive, deceptive, weaselly things that we discussed banks have done over history, they have somehow always kept it under wraps, in the shadows, and presented a nice image. Big stately buildings, columns, suits and ties, vaulted ceilings, palatial lobbies, and big vaults with heavy, complicated-looking vault doors. So civilized society has engaged these people as trusted, trustworthy middlemen in transactions. They have helped spread commerce throughout the globe by providing trust between strangers. And banks do this by vetting parties, by gathering information, addresses, ID numbers, and FICO scores. They provide a middleman and a central way that we can trust by creating a kind of insider user club. They don't issue bank accounts or debit cards or PayPal accounts or Amex cards to just anyone. They facilitate our Apple Pay transactions or Visa swipes or Amazon purchases. And they take huge fees out of the transactions that are traveling through their insider pipeline or over their bridge. I think of banks as the troll under the bridge, and we've become used to paying extortion in the prettied-up form of merchant fees or annual fees or ATM fees. Sometimes these are paid by the seller as a cost of doing business with us, but the fees are there for these centralized troll trust providers. If you're unlucky enough to be living on the wrong side of the tracks, or if you're down on your luck or working in a blue-collar job or not mainstream in some way, there's a barrier to using these banking trust purveyors. If you're not part of the middle-class, fully banked and vetted club, you have a shitload of fees waiting for you with your name on them. Check cashing companies that take 10% of your check to cash it. Western Union's business model that takes 15% or more from the lowest paid, hardest working people who are trying to send their money, the value of their sweat and hard-earned labor, home to support their families. These are the financial institutions who are gatekeepers, or billy goat toll collectors, who provide the missing ingredient to transact between strangers. Trust. Can't live with them, can't live without them. So point 5 is that banks and financial companies have inserted themselves as a middleman in transaction, providing trust services. So that's my essential overview of how things are in the world of money and finance. Here's a really quick review once again. Number 1, money is a container. We have a need for money to facilitate transactions between us and to capture and store the wealth of our labor to put it on ice until we need to spend it. Money should be divisible, durable, a store of wealth, and it should be scarce. And in the past, gold and silver did a great job. Most important, each person deserves the courtesy of sound money. Number 2, there's a temptation for bankers to overprint money receipts. It became clear a long, long time ago that he who controls the gold can make the rules. And bankers and governments rushed into this space to usurp this control and to benefit from the insider world of money creation, the temptation of debasing the currency or printing excess currency and stealing from the general public pocket into the banking and politician pocket. As you know from the local coffee shop or convenience store, working with money for even the lowest of clerks creates temptation. And that temptation is exaggerated when the scope involves handling the money for a city, for a state, or for a nation. It's a recipe for disaster, and it always seems to make good on that promise. There's a 1,000-year historical precedent for bankers and governments to suction and siphon money from the general population into the hands of the elite few. It seems to almost be a perk of being elite. Point number 3, central bankers can be partners in crime with government. Linking money to a fixed supply of precious, limited, scarce commodity goes a long way to keep money sound and accountable. But introducing a central bank partnership with the government never benefits citizens because it increases, actually doubles, the cost of money and creates a resultant tax burden. That's never good. Most countries can mint their own money without the help of outsiders, let alone expensive subcontractors like the Fed. Point number 4, notes as debt and fiat. Having the Fed pads the pockets of government workers and politicians, and it drains the wallet of ordinary workers who have to bear the expense of paying interest, taxes, and the hidden tax of inflation due to money printing. When money is decoupled, unlinked from anything of value, it becomes currency only as long as we believe it to be. Moreover, when currency is debt, it is a liability, a cost, rather than a store of value. And finally, point number 5, we have come to use institutions as a centralized means of trust. And unfortunately, institutions aren't always noble, transparent, or trustworthy. We discussed the former need to have regal institutions of honor and trust to facilitate transactions and commerce. Trust came from trust organizations as a part of the cost of transacting. But sometimes those organizations can become extortionists when they have a monopoly based on their trust position, their fee-based business model in transactions. Looking back when the internet was evolving in the mid-90s, few people could appreciate the benefit of, let's say, email, until they stopped to examine how slow and antiquated the postal system was, with buildings and delivery trucks and carriers and limited hours, compared to moving information digitally. It's important to similarly set the stage for the world of banking and money to fully appreciate how the Internet of money, open 24/7, 365, makes so much more sense. So that's the short history of the financial world in about 20 minutes, maybe a little more. Thanks for listening. I'm going to make a short sheet of this Class A, Accept Reality Information. It'll be available in a link below soon. It'll be a refresher of what we learned in this Lesson A of the Adopt course to help you be an early adopter. In the next lesson, D, Decide, I'll help you explore Bitcurrency, and we'll see how Bitcurrency, Bitcoin, and cryptocurrency solve the problems of distrustful bankers and central banks, the problem of inflation, of debt-based fiat money, and of providing a system of decentralized trust between any two individuals without requiring a central authority or troll under the bridge. With Bitcurrency, we can again use sound money, value without decaying inflation. We can use it easily with complete trust built into the system without banks or financial institutions or fees. We can use it globally without borders as easily as we email. So I'll see you in the next lesson, D, where we decide to explore Bitcurrency. Thanks for listening and learning together. I'm doing this series to shortcut and turbocharge your understanding of Bitcurrency, which I feel is the Internet of money. I'm not selling anything. I believe it's just important to lift the veil and to lift the understanding of the general public so that you can benefit from the Bitcurrency revolution, or really, substitution. At this early time, you can become an early adopter. So please subscribe now. Share, like, and leave your comments below. Really, I appreciate them. Stop and do this simple act now. If you're inclined to support my work in any amount, I greatly appreciate it. It'll enable me to do more. There are links below to PayPal, Patreon, and several Bitcurrencies. I appreciate your help. See you in the next class.